Okay, now I think we are ready to start this session. So good afternoon, everybody who are in the Hawassa region, and then good evening for those who are in Seoul. Okay, I hope that you enjoy your lunch and dinner before this session. We are heading toward the last part of the training workshop now. We are now having the two sessions left, and this session has been organized in a way that we can share the good experiences of leading international organizations, so who has been working together with the developing countries in the context of implementing their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. As we already know that NDC is the term, make it simple to explain, that's a national climate change policy, okay? And then every country is supposed to submit the implementation of the NDC to the UNFCCC on the regular basis. In that regard, that there are many needs for international organizations in the context of how to prepare and implement their national plans to implement the goals under the Paris Agreement. Here, we invited two distinguished speakers from two leading organizations. First one is Dr. Chris Dickinson of the Global Green Growth Institute. He is the head of the Sustainable Landscape in this organization right now, based in Seoul, Korea. And the other speaker, the second speaker, is Dr. Sawa Chaudhary. She is working at the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. And then both of them has been pretty, supportive and then active in implementing our current COICA project for Hawassa University and others in Ethiopia. Having said that, and now I'd like to hand over my microphone to Chris so that he can present what he prepared for us today. So Chris, the floor is now yours.
Yep. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to say good evening and good afternoon to everybody. And yeah, as Mr. Chung introduced me, my name is Chris Dickinson. I'm the head of Sustainable Landscapes of DGI in South Korea. Prior to this job, I used to spend 2 years working for the Environment, Forestry, Climate Change Commission in Ethiopia, working for the Deputy Commissioner Ato Kabada and Dr. Tule. So I'm quite familiar with Ethiopia. It's a fantastic country, and there's a lot of issues there related to forestry, forest restoration, peacekeeping, sustainable forest management and plantations, and also agribusiness. So I'm very pleased to be able to be invited today to speak to you about what DGI is doing around the world and also in Ethiopia. In my position as head of DGI Sustainable Landscapes, we have projects in Colombia, Peru, Indonesia, and some new projects starting in India, and hopefully Ethiopia in the future, and also Papua New Guinea. So we have quite a wide spread of projects across the world in the Pacific, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And so, yeah, very pleased to be here today. And Professor Chung is obviously very familiar with DGI as one of the founding sort of pioneers to help support the organization. So I'm very pleased to be invited today. And also, I haven't actually met Professor Chaudhary before, but it'd be good to meet in the future in Seoul. So first of all, my presentation will be talking a little bit about the aims of DGI and what the organization does, and also about the Sustainable Landscape Program, which is the program that I am the director of. So first of all, DGI's vision, mission, and position. We are promoting low carbon resilient growth around the world. We're a member country organization with 37 countries who've signed up to support DGI's strategy and funding and work around the world. and our mission is to support the members in transformation of their economies to a green growth economic model. This obviously is very pertinent in the 21st century and also in the COVID world, not just for COVID recovery, but also for climate change and for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And our position as an organization is that we work very, very closely with government organizations. And usually our country programs are embedded inside the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Forestry or the Ministry of Climate Change around the world. So we have very good relationships with government. And this is very key and important for being able to implement projects and activities. So what sort of things do we do? We have more than 100 projects around the world now, and we contribute to all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, including SDG 16, which is working on peacekeeping. And we have a project with the Korean Forest Service looking at developing a funding tool for environmental peace building. DGI currently has 37 partner countries, including Ethiopia and Rwanda and Uganda. So there's quite a lot of interest in East Africa. And we have some countries that are interested in joining from Africa, which includes Ghana, Ivory Coast, Zambia, and Togo. So a lot of interest. And as you can imagine, Africa is a really interesting place to work, but also is threatened through climate change, food security, deforestation, climate change adaptation, and many other issues. So DGI is very happy to be working in Africa to support these issues. And we work with, for example, the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution Partnership, and we're supporting a number of different countries to develop the climate change plans for reducing emissions and also adaptation to emissions. The thematic areas we work with are principally sustainable energy, sustainable landscapes, which includes my program, and we're looking at forests, agriculture, and coastal resilience. Green cities, so for example, in Addis Ababa, you have many problems with waste, with green urban space, and with urban planning. So green cities are very important because I think by 2030 it's predicted that a huge, enormous proportion of the world's population will live in urban areas. Hello, and we also have two cross-cutting areas, which are green investment services and climate action. So investment is one of the key issues to solving climate change problems. How do we mobilize funding? How do we mobilize private sector? How do we also mobilize the government of each country? So this is a very, very key cross-cutting issue. And we also have climate change action and inclusive development. So this is looking at the country's national adaptation plans, the green growth plans, etc. And Ethiopia actually, I think, is one of the best countries for having very well developed plans and strategies for climate change and green growth. It's I worked there for 2 years, and you'd be pleased to hear that I think that you're doing very well as an ambassador for climate change in Africa. Where does DGI work? Well, as you can see from this graph here, we cover a large number of countries. We have some member countries such as UK, Denmark, and Norway. These are countries that are committed to green growth strategies and also in provision of funding for the DGI. And we have member countries who are recipients of funding and also recipients of the technical assistance of DGI staff, etc. So from this map here, you can see we extend from the Solomon Islands in the Pacific to Mozambique, to Angola, which is the new country in the southwest Africa, to Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, Colombia. So we have a very good coverage of covering a lot of different countries and environmental situations. The major goals of DGI are to, well, one is to work with the member countries to help with transformation of their economies into low carbon and resilient economic models. This is very important because climate change is very important. Many of the African countries are going to be affected by rainfall patterns, by temperature, and by other issues, and we must try and develop resilient economic strategies which reduce emissions but also promote growth and jobs. And secondly is to develop DGI into an organization that is sustainable, respected, and also able to mobilize funds for our member countries. That's one of the key goals of the organization. In 2020, there was a new strategic document developed, 10-year plan for DGI, and one of the number 3 is one of the key core operational priorities which are related to my area, and is looking at achieving a sustainable and circular bioeconomy while securing healthy natural ecosystems. So as I mentioned before, this has 3 major components. 1, looking at climate resilient agriculture. This is very important for many parts of the world. We have demands on water. We have increasing pests like the locust storms in Africa, and we need to try and come up with resilient cropping practices or intensification of agriculture so it reduces the pressure on the landscape. Secondly is regarding sustainable forests, and this is looking at REDD+. For example, we have REDD+ programs in Colombia, Peru, and Indonesia. And REDD+ stands for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So it's basically about improving the quality of forests and making sure that there are systems in place to maintain communities and people, as well as preserving the ecosystems. And the people who will have listened to my colleague Lou Miguel yesterday will have heard all about forest landscape restoration, which is the very key part of many countries' development strategies. We must develop systems where we have productive landscapes, where we maintain the ecosystems, we maintain water. Water is fundamental for life and agriculture, and we also stop soil erosion. And the third part is coastal resilience. So a lot of the countries that DGI works in are in the Pacific or islands or have coastal areas. And these are incredibly vulnerable to future sea level rise, the increase of storms, and the increase of floods. So we are looking at mangrove protection, seagrass protection, and also other strategies to make the coastal ecosystems and the communities who depend on them more resilient. If you look at this slide also, it's talking about working with the cities, looking at green buildings, mobility and waste management. And in Ethiopia, we have a program looking at sustainable mobility. So this means like more effective bus transportation systems. It is crazy in this 21st century that we don't have more better, more efficient public transport systems for people, especially as I mentioned earlier, that the population of the world are moving more towards cities. It's something that we must try and develop to reduce emissions and make our lives more easier, yeah? Anyone who's been stuck in a Addis Ababa traffic jam will also probably agree with me here as well. We must try and improve how we get to work and how we can make our children travel to school, etc. And we're also supporting, as I mentioned before, working with the low emission development strategies and the climate adaptation plans. So in Ethiopia, DGI will be working with a national adaptation plan development and also with a low emission development strategy in 2021. These are important for being able to help Ethiopia plan better how it adapts to climate change and also how to mobilize funding. DGI has 6 major strategic outcomes, and these have been developed through a number of different strategic analysis and discussion with experts around the world. And the first one is how to reduce GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And in the landscape fields, this is very, very important. So emissions from agriculture are quite high, especially in areas where we have large livestock populations, and also in areas where there is a lot of rice cultivation, such as Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and also in areas where we find deforestation undertaken in order to convert into agriculture. So this is one of the key strategies we're looking at. Number two is the creation of green jobs. Now, as I know from working in Africa and Ethiopia, this is one of the key priorities of the government, how to create jobs for the unemployed population. This is a big, big problem in many parts of Africa. And if you look at how to create jobs and you think of $1 million invested, if you invest this in renewable energy, this will create about 7.5 jobs. If you invest $1 million in forestry, it can create between 500 to 1,000 jobs. So the forestry sector and agriculture is extremely efficient in terms of creation of jobs and feeding the nation, and also creating stability. I think about 85% of Ethiopia's population live in the rural areas. So even though there's a move towards urbanization and green industry, still in many countries in Africa, we must not forget the rural poor living in the rural area. The third one is the access to sustainable services. This means the access to finance, health and transport. The fourth one is the improved air quality. I used to work in Mongolia, where, for example, the air is extremely polluted in the winter. So this is a big issue for many countries, and even countries like UK, France, Thailand have encountered very high air pollution in the last 2 or 3 years. So it's an issue that's not just pertinent to developing countries, but also to developed ones. Number 5 is looking at ecosystem services. And in Ethiopia, you will see that the ecosystems of the uplands and lowlands are very important for ensuring that Ethiopia can develop into a middle-income country. As Louis Miguel, my colleague, spoke yesterday, the restoration of uplands helps prevent soil erosion, which can, excessive soil erosion affects the life of a hydropower dam, and it can also help with the water provisioning services, so helping with rainfall provision and providing water for agriculture. And the 6th objective is looking at adaptation to climate change. Hello? Maybe someone can turn the microphone off. So adaptation to climate change is a big problem across many parts of the world, not just Ethiopia, but also in Asia, where they have predicted large changes in water and rainfall patterns, and also in countries like Peru, which has glaciers in the mountains melting. So there's a lack of water provision, for example. So these are all big issues that DGI is trying to look at with our member countries. Who funds DGI? Well, we have funding from the member countries. We also have funding from the Korean government, which we're very happy to receive. And we are working currently with the Korean Forest Service, who are not on this slide here, to do 2 projects. One is looking at the World Forestry Congress, which will be held in Seoul in 2021. This is an event held every 6 years. It's going to have about 5,000 foresters come to Seoul to discuss pertinent issues in forest degradation, investment, working with communities, and promoting industry. So this is a very, very key activity that we're helping with the Korean government to organize and provide technical assistance to how the event will be structured. And we're also working with the Korean government on developing an environmental peacekeeping trust fund for preserving forests, restoring them, and trying to generate communities, discuss and solve problems through maintaining ecosystem services. This is very important in a country like Ethiopia, where you have issues, internal issues. There are large numbers of refugees in, for example, Gambela, and you also have upland watersheds which flow into Kenya or Egypt or other countries, which need to be restored and maintained in a harmonious way to promote peace and to generate income for communities. So this is a very interesting project which I'm very excited about, and very happy to be working with the Korean government on this activity. We're also working with KOICA, and as you probably heard from Mr. Innocent's presentation, we submitted a proposal for climate resilient watershed development in Ethiopia, and we are hoping that this will be funded in 2021. We want it to be like a model for developing restoration of upland watershed, as I mentioned before, to protect the ecosystem services. There are many dams that I've been to in Ethiopia, such as the Koga Dam, which is supposed to last for 50, 60, 70 years. But already after 5 years, it has been full of soil and sedimentation, and the water levels are increasing, and the profitability of the dam is reducing. Another key donor we have is the Norwegian government, and they provide funding for Peru, Colombia, Guyana, and Indonesia. They're one of our biggest donors, but we're trying to expand the number of donors we have all the time. And we've recently been developing a proposal for $20 million for Uganda to look at forest restoration and innovative financing mechanisms. So even though there are many pressures on the funds of the world at the moment with the COVID pandemic, we must not forget about the fact that we need to restore ecosystems, and there's an estimated $300 billion per year needed to restore and maintain forest ecosystems. There's enormous amounts needed to build water infrastructure, such as hydropower or irrigation, and this is essential for adaptation measures and also for communities and agriculture. There's an enormous amount of money needed. At the moment, it's been focused on the COVID pandemic, but we must not forget that this is like an issue that is affecting many, many countries in the world. So in terms of the DGI's work with COVID-19, we are doing quite a few things with the different member countries. One of the first tasks that I did in the start of my work with DGI was to develop a forest restoration program for 10 countries in Africa. And we're hoping this will be funded by the EU to try and generate jobs using some of the funds for green recovery and also for restoring ecosystems. So this is a very important part of our work, how to come up with responses for COVID-19. And if people are interested, I found out yesterday about a webinar next week organized by FAO, which is looking at COVID-19 and forestry. I think this is very useful for the Hawassa team, and I will send the link to this to Professor Chong after the presentation. I think it is very useful for people to attend and to learn more about how forestry is important in economic development and also helping to respond to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in terms of preparedness as an organization, I came to Seoul in February. After 1 week in the office, we were told to work at home. It was sort of quite difficult for me, but luckily DGI has had quite a lot of thinking about this beforehand, about working with video conferences and online tools, etc., and also flexible work arrangements. And I think that many organizations around the world will try to look at how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in terms of travel for workshops or for working with other stakeholders in the future. However, having said that, when you have workshops online or meetings online, they are quite good, but there are still some occasions where you need to sit down with individuals in Ethiopia to discuss something face to face. So video conferencing is good and can help solve many of our problems with working at the moment, but we still need to have that face-to-face contact with people. Here are some documents for reference that have been developed by DGI. One of the things that I'm doing over the next year is developing a portfolio of DGI's activities around the world in sustainable landscapes, and also developing a toolkit for financing. And as I mentioned before, we need $300 to $400 billion, sorry, not million dollars per year for forest restoration and protection. How do we go about mobilizing this? It needs to come from the private sector, from the public, and from payments from ecosystem services. So hopefully we can develop some tools that can be used in Ethiopia. When I worked in Vietnam, I worked on the payments for ecosystem service program, and that currently generates $155 million per year for upstream forest protection. So I think this is something that Ethiopia should also be looking at, how to mobilize funding from the hydropower or the irrigation to maintain upland forest ecosystems, in a way similar to what was discussed and presented by Lou Miguel yesterday. We introduced our 2019 annual report recently and had some quite good successes around the world. For example, $360 million was mobilized by DGI, 21 green growth policies adopted by different governments around the world, and also a lot of capacity building around the world. So all these things are impressive, but international organizations need to also think of quality. So for example, even though policies are adopted, we should be actually looking at policies implemented. That is much more important than adopted, yeah? Adopted and implemented. Capacity building is very easy to do, but we must start to think as an international organization how to ensure capacity building is real, it's aimed at the right people, and also that people after the training actually implement this in the day-to-day work. So it needs a number of different issues. And for example, Professor Chuchung is an expert in academic training, and that's very useful, but we also need things like on-the-job training as well. So these sort of programs need to have both the academic training, the hands-on day-to-day experience, and perhaps workshops for sharing like this one. So we need to have a different number of methods. Another core program of DGI is the Greenpreneurs program. So this is aimed at training young people in how to build a business, develop a business, and how to look for funding. It was a competitive program, and this year we had 150 to 200 applicants for 15 positions for this. It's online training, so it's not a face-to-face training, but it is a very well-designed program to support young people in their businesses. There is one young man from Ethiopia who was successful. This is Mr. Adel, who has a program, who has a small company developing bamboo bicycles and bamboo wheelchairs in Ethiopia. And I was very happy that he was selected as one of the 15 candidates for the Greenpreneurs program. And I hope that he can use the skills that he is learning to try and develop a good business plan and hopefully to mobilize funding for the future. It is a very interesting and innovative business modality. And it might be something that Koike also in Ethiopia might want to consider funding as well for a small amount of money. He is a very inspiring young Ethiopian man that I've met when I was working in Ethiopia. So I was very pleased that he was selected. In terms of sustainable landscapes, this is the program I'm working with. As I said, this is looking at water, agriculture, forests, and coastal resilience. And the aim is to focus on sustaining healthy and functioning forests, agricultural landscapes, waterways, and coastal ecosystems. Personally, I think this is the most exciting part of DGI's work. And obviously I say that because I'm a forester and agricultural expert, but I think that this is also important for DGI because it works a lot with people. All these ecosystems and agriculture is fundamental for the life of human beings. and it is very, very useful for DGI to focus on this. Okay, and we have some documents looking at transition to a new growth of green growth, and sustainable landscapes is very, very key to this. Even though people are moving to the cities, we still need food, we still need forests, we still need the coastal resilience. So this is one of the most important parts of DGI's portfolio. Yeah, so this is again talking about the aim is to achieve circular bioeconomy. So that means making sure that ecosystems are providing water provision for downstream, and also we're looking at waste and ensuring that forestry is used for both production and conservation. The theory of change for sustainable landscapes is looking at the challenges, the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes. So you can see from this diagram here, and we can share the PowerPoint, is that a lot of the work we're doing is looking at land degradation, working with different partners, and thirdly, looking at the financial instruments and solutions. And one of the things that we've been focusing on is the identification of natural capital. And natural capital means that often in countries or businesses, people just look at the profit and they ignore the fact about the social capital and the environmental capital. So a good example of this is from Ethiopia, where a study was done by United Nations Environment and also the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change. We looked at not just the direct income value of the forests, which I think is about 3.7% in Ethiopia, but they quantified the natural capital, the value of the firewood, which isn't sold, or the value of pollination, the value of soil sedimentation, and other provisionary issues. And this analysis showed that the value of forests in Ethiopia is 12.7%, so quite high, much higher than the direct income from sales of wood or timber. And that analysis didn't include water. So I think that if you included water provisioning, I think that you would see the value of the forests to Ethiopia be much higher, maybe even 20% of the total country's GDP. So DGI is trying to look at how to evaluate this in different countries around the world, not just look at the direct income, but also the environmental and social values. Okay, and this is about the service offerings that we do around the world. Particularly, we are looking at financial analysis and also working with commodities, such as we work in India on palm oil and Indonesia on palm oil. In South America, a lot of the work is on livestock. A lot of deforestation is caused by the demand for beef around the world, both in America, Europe, and China, and China. So it's good to be vegetarian because this causes a lot of deforestation around the world. And an example of how we work in different countries with the 3 returns approach is from, for example, Myanmar, where we have been quantifying the benefits of mangrove ecosystems. Mangrove is a forest that survives in the coastal areas. It's very, very fantastic ecosystem because it helps protect against storms, it helps protect against typhoons, it provides fuel wood, it can also provide for jobs and for ecosystem services, and also for income for things like crabs or shells or fish. I know that in Ethiopia you don't eat many shrimps or shellfish, but in other parts of the world where it's more accessible, it's a very important part of diet and also income for sale around Southeast Asia. Okay, I'll just skip this one. Some examples of our programs. We are working a lot in Indonesia, funded by the Norwegian government. We have a $20 million project looking at green growth, climate change, and working with the peatland forests. So Indonesia is one of the world's top 3 biodiversity centers, one of the top 3 largest forest areas, and also has a lot of underground carbon, which is known as peat because it doesn't degrade very well. And these areas are threatened for commercial agriculture and from burning. And we've been looking at some innovative models to try and have some long-term investments through what's known as a green bond. And this is very innovative and something that we hope to replicate in other parts of the DGI member countries. Possibly this type of system could be used in Ethiopia for preserving the upland watersheds to protect the downstream hydropower. Okay. Okay, I'll just skip this one. And also in Indonesia, you can see that there are a lot of peatlands by the coastal area. And we also work in partnership with different organizations, with the government, with NGOs, with organizations like WWF. So one of the SDG goals, I think it's number 16, is about partnerships and international cooperation. And to help with climate change issues, we have to have partnerships and collaboration. Okay, and in Myanmar, as I mentioned before, we're working with the mangroves here in the Arawali Delta to provide fisheries and shrimps and ecosystem services. And this involves working with communities to develop systems for participatory forest management. Okay, and another picture. Actually, this is quite similar to the previous picture, so I'll skip over this one. And in Colombia, we have a $12 million project with the Norwegian government, which is looking at REDD+. And one of the big impacts on deforestation in Colombia is regards livestock and deforestation for conversion to soya. And we developed a number of different financial solutions to increase productivity and also to help farmers intensify existing land so they don't have to expand to new areas. This is a very important model to be developed around the world. It also has implications to other GTGI countries such as Indonesia with palm oil, or perhaps in Ethiopia with coffee or other activities that may impact or cause deforestation. Okay, and yeah, financial solutions for all these issues are one of the biggest problems and bottlenecks around the world. And this is something which DGI has a speciality in. We have a very big investment services team and program looking at investments and how to work with communities and banks, etc., and mobilize funding, but also implement it. Colombia is one of the key areas that we're working with, especially with cattle ranching. Okay, so that's my quick presentation on DGI and what we're doing around the world. I hope that was useful.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. Excellent enough for us to understand what kind of organization DGI is about, and then how DGI has been making contributions for developing countries, especially in forestry sector, and what are the practical cases that the DGI has been involved. And then out of it, and I think we can also understand what are the potential opportunities that we can identify in Ethiopia in that context as well. Before I go to the second speaker, I think that there could be some questions, comments from the audience. So I just want to have some Q&A session and then among us before the second presentation. So if there is any questions or comments, you can now speak out and then directly ask Chris. Let me see if there were any questions in the chat room. Chris, there is one. Can you see the chat room now? From your
screen? Can't see anything. Yeah.
Okay.
I can see the question and answer, but I can't see any questions. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Then even if you, for instance, left a question in the chatting room, then you can still speak out. and the director asked Chris at this time. So floor is open for everybody. And then if you have any questions, please raise them to Chris.
Oh, I can see some questions now. Yeah.
Oh yeah, if you can, then that can be the starting
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. There's something about tree planting and Professor Park and working with the Ethiopian government. And tree planting is very important, but we must think also about tree growing. Yeah? Not just planting, but also maintaining them. Yeah, I can't see any other questions. Okay. Okay, so DGI works with mainly through member countries, through government organizations, but we also do have a lot of work with NGOs and the private sector. That's a question from Mr. Mulata. The only way we can achieve forest restoration and conservation around the world is through working with all these different sectors. Yeah, you cannot just work through the government alone. It has to work with the private sector, universities as well, communities, schools, companies, banks, etc. So one of the reasons why forest restoration and the sustainable landscapes issue is very important and interesting is because you get to work with different types of stakeholder. Okay. And there's something here about churches and mosques. Yeah, religious organizations in countries like Ethiopia is very, very important. You have some very, very good church forests where you have like a church surrounded by beautiful forests around the world, around in Ethiopia. And these need to be like a center for expanding forest restoration and sustainable landscape restoration around the church area. So I think that Ethiopia can lead on that around the world. It's a very, very good model. So I think that's all the questions that I can see. Oh,
okay.
It's a message from Mr. ZNU. Also, thank you very much for your congratulations, and I hope you're doing well. It's one of my old colleagues.
Okay, unless you have any other questions directly asking him now, then I would like to go to the second speaker. Is there any question? Then anybody can raise it. Anything? No. Okay, Chris, thank you very much. I know it's getting late in Seoul, but you know, it was a really great presentation today. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay.
Bye. Okay.
Okay. So good night then. Bye. See you.